The doctor did not raise his voice when he said the word pregnant. Outside the window, winter rain braided itself down the glass. Elias Wen sat very still, hands folded over his coat, calm face lowered, breath measured enough to deceive anyone who did not know how to watch an omega's pulse beating too quickly at his throat. 6 weeks, the doctor said, placing the report between them. Stable for now. But your pheromone levels are strained. You need rest, regular meals, and no prolonged exposure to high-pressure alpha environments. He hesitated. Your bond partner should be informed. Elias looked at the paper. His name was printed neatly at the top, as if ink could make this real. Can I continue working? That is not my primary concern. It is mine. Everyone knew who Elias's bond partner was. Adrian Liu, acting CEO of Liu Holdings, was not the sort of alpha people imagined beside a cradle. He was the man senior executives feared. The man whose office lights stayed on past midnight. The man Elias had legally married after a pheromone accident during a hotel lockdown 6 months ago. They had signed the papers 3 days later. Adrian called it containment. Elias called it survival. Neither of them had called it marriage. I don't want this uploaded to the household medical system, Elias said. Print only. No electronic copy. The doctor's silence lasted long enough to become disapproval. Elias did not soften. In the end, the report was sealed in a cream envelope and placed in his hands. He thanked the doctor with the composure that made people underestimate the damage beneath it. By the time he stepped into the elevator, his knees had begun to tremble. He pressed the envelope against his abdomen, then lowered his hand at once, afraid of the tenderness in that instinctive gesture. A child. Adrian's child. The words felt like 2 pieces of glass forced into the same wound. Liu Holdings' executive floor seemed built around Adrian's silence. When Elias entered the conference room, rain trailing cold over his coat, Adrian did not look up from the documents in front of him. You're 7 minutes late. The directors looked down at once. Elias closed the door and bowed his head slightly. I apologize. Adrian's gaze lifted for only a second, but that second was sharper than anyone else's scrutiny. Begin with the revised acquisition notes. Elias opened his folder. His voice stayed steady through debt exposure and projected losses. Then the smell of someone's coffee curled across the table, bitter and oily, and the room narrowed around him. He paused for half a breath. Adrian's eyes moved to him. If the overseas subsidiary is folded into the parent structure before the second quarter, the tax burden. The sentence broke apart. The table edge slipped from his fingers. He did not fall dramatically. Elias had trained himself out of drama long ago. He merely swayed, one hand gripping the folder until the paper bent. The envelope hidden inside his coat slid free and struck the polished floor with a soft, unforgivable sound. Meeting adjourned, Adrian said. No one moved. Now. Chairs scraped back. Directors left with the panic of people who had seen a blade flash but not where it landed. Elias bent to retrieve the envelope, but Adrian reached it first. For one suspended moment, their hands nearly touched. Then Adrian saw the clinic seal. His face did not change. That was the thing about Adrian Liu, even shock obeyed him. You went to the clinic, he said. I had a routine checkup. Routine reports are not sealed by hand. Elias held out his palm. Give it back. Something passed through Adrian's eyes. Too fast to name. He opened the envelope. Elias could have stopped him if they had been equals. They were not. Adrian read the first page, then the second, and the quiet in the conference room became so complete that the rain seemed loud. How long have you known? Adrian asked. Since this morning. And your plan was to continue taking meeting notes until you collapsed. My plan was to finish work. Adrian looked at him then. Really looked. And Elias disliked it more than indifference. Anger would have given him something to resist. Instead, there was calculation disrupted by something unfamiliar, something Adrian himself did not seem prepared to recognize. His thumb pressed once against the edge of the paper. To anyone else, it would have meant nothing. Elias saw the whitened knuckle. "You should have told me," Adrian said. Elias smiled faintly, without warmth. "So you could arrange it. So I could know." The simplicity of the answer landed badly. Elias turned his face toward the glass wall. He had spent 6 months living in Adrian's house. Sleeping in a separate room, connected by a hallway too wide to cross by accident. Adrian paid his medical bills, marked household boundaries, corrected his work, and never asked what Elias dreamed about before dawn. Knowing, in Adrian's world, meant control. Elias had survived too much to confuse control with care. Adrian took out his phone. Cancel the strategic review. His chief assistant froze in the doorway. "Mr. Liu, the regional directors have already arrived. Then they can leave. The vote is scheduled for 4. Reschedule it." The assistant's eyes flickered toward Elias, then away. "Yes, sir." Elias stared at Adrian. "That meeting has been planned for 3 months. And you have been pregnant for 6 weeks. Adrian's tone was still flat, his posture still severe. But Elias felt suddenly as if a hand had closed around the back of his chair to keep him from falling. It frightened him more than the dizziness had. The ride back to the Liu residence took 40 minutes. Adrian sat beside him instead of across from him, leaving half a seat of space between their coats. He did not touch Elias. He did not ask whether the child was wanted, whether Elias was afraid, whether this changed the contract between them. He asked only, "Have you eaten?" "Yes." "When?" "Morning." "It is 3 in the afternoon. I wasn't hungry." Adrian instructed the driver to stop near the old financial district. He returned with warm porridge, steamed egg, and plain crackers. The paper bag sat between them like an awkward apology. Neither of them had agreed to acknowledge. Elias ate because his stomach had begun to ache, and because Adrian watched the traffic ahead as though granting him privacy by will. At the residence, the staff lined up too quickly. Adrian handed his coat to no one. "Remove the lilies from the East Hall. Replace the bedroom diffuser with unscented air. No raw seafood in the kitchen. No strong cleaning agents on the 2nd floor. Have doctor. Veil on call after 8. The carpet near the stairs is loose." Elias stood by the entrance, listening to his life become a list of precautions. "I'm not made of porcelain. You nearly fainted in a conference room." Nearly. That distinction is useful in reports, not in bodies. Several servants lowered their heads. Elias felt heat climb under his skin. Part embarrassment, part anger, part something too delicate to examine. Adrian was not being tender. Tenderness had warmth in it. This was command, efficient and absolute. Yet every order had curved around the same center: don't let him be harmed. Elias went upstairs before that thought could weaken him. He intended to rest for 10 minutes and woke after sunset to the smell of smoke. The kitchen looked as if a minor war had been fought and lost with stainless steel. A pot sat in the sink, exhaling grey wisps. A nutrition guide lay open beside a cutting board, its clean pages marked with Adrian's precise handwriting. Adrian stood in front of the stove with his sleeves rolled to the forearm, looking at a second pot as though it had personally betrayed him. Elias stopped in the doorway. Adrian turned. For the first time since Elias had known him, he looked almost caught. The guide said millet congee is suitable. Adrian said, the guide didn't say you had to make it personally. The house chef uses too much seasoning. You dismissed the chef. I gave him the evening off. Elias looked at the smoke. The scorched pot. The Alpha CEO with a faint burn reddening the side of his thumb. Something moved in his chest. Small and painful. Rice doesn't become obedient because you stare at it. It wasn't rice. That explains why the rice survived. The words came out before he could stop them. Adrian looked at him for a long second. Then, very faintly, the severity around his mouth eased. It was not a smile. Adrian Liu probably considered smiles inefficient, but the kitchen felt less cold. Elias crossed the room and reached for the stove. Adrian caught his wrist before he touched the handle. Don't. I can cook. I know. Adrian's grip loosened immediately, as if he had realized too late that holding Elias too tightly was another kind of mistake. Tonight. You shouldn't. That sentence did what no order had done. It entered quietly. Elias stared at their hands, at the careful space Adrian left between fingers and pulse. The Alpha's pheromones were restrained almost brutally, locked down so they would not pressure him. For months, Elias had thought of that restraint as distance. Now, standing in a ruined kitchen that smelled of smoke and failed congee, he wondered whether restraint could also be consideration. You burned yourself. Elias said, it's nothing. You always say that to employees who make mistakes. No, I tell them exactly how expensive the mistake was. Then, consider this medical debt. He took the ointment from the emergency drawer before Adrian could refuse. Adrian allowed him to apply it, though every line of his body suggested he did not know how to be tended to. Elias spread the ointment over the reddened skin with 2 careful fingers. Neither of them spoke. Outside the kitchen windows, rain trembled under the garden lights like threads of glass. The congee was too thick and faintly bitter. Adrian tasted it, went silent, and pushed a plate of sliced pears toward Elias instead. You don't have to do this, Elias said. Adrian wiped the counter with unnecessary focus. You need to eat. That isn't what I meant. I know. But he did not answer the meaning beneath it. Perhaps he could not. Elias should have been relieved by the silence. It was safer than tenderness. Safer than wanting something from someone who had never promised to stay. Later, when the house had settled and the staff moved like shadows beyond the walls, Elias went downstairs for water. He stopped near the turn of the main staircase when he heard Helena Liu's voice drifting from the east sitting room. The child must be registered under the Liu family immediately after birth, Helena said. Her tone was elegant, almost weary, as though discussing a necessary renovation. As for Elias Wen, arrangements can be made. Omegas become sentimental after delivery. It is better to settle matters before attachment complicates things. Elias stood motionless in the dim corridor, one hand resting against the banister. Inside the room, glass touched wood with a soft click. Adrian was there. Elias knew it from the silence that followed, from the way even the air seemed to wait for his reply. But before Adrian spoke, Helena continued, calm and merciless. You have already done more than enough. No one expects you to play husband forever. The water glass slipped slightly in Elias's hand. He tightened his fingers before it could fall. Upstairs. In the room, Adrian had ordered cleared of lilies and sharp scents. The ultrasound photo lay hidden beneath his pillow like a secret too fragile for daylight. In the sitting room, Adrian finally drew breath. Elias turned away before he could hear the answer. Elias did not sleep after returning to his room. He sat against the headboard with the blanket folded neatly over his knees, the untouched glass of water on the bedside table. and the ultrasound photo hidden beneath his pillow like a confession he had not decided whether to destroy. The rain continued until dawn. Its sound softened the edges of the house, but not the sentence lodged beneath his ribs. No one expects you to play husband forever. He had not stayed to hear Adrian's answer. Cowardice, perhaps, or wisdom. Elias had learned young that the words people withheld could wound less than the words they eventually chose. In the mirror across the room, his face looked composed, almost pale enough to be harmless. He placed one hand low on his abdomen and tried to imagine a life inside him as something other than evidence, something other than leverage. At 7, the door opened after a restrained knock. Adrian entered, carrying a tray. He had changed into a dark shirt, with the sleeves buttoned properly this time. But there was still a faint mark near his thumb from last night's burn. Elias noticed it before he could stop himself. Adrian noticed Elias noticing and set the tray down as if the timing of a heartbeat could be corrected through silence. Breakfast. Adrian said, "I'm not hungry." "You said that yesterday." And survived. Barely. The tray held rice porridge, steamed custard, warm milk, and 2 slices of pear cut too evenly to have been prepared by anyone except a man who believed symmetry could compensate for inexperience. Elias looked at the food, then at Adrian's expressionless face. The absurdity should have been comforting. Instead, it made something inside him ache with suspicion. A person could learn tenderness for many reasons. Duty was one of them. Guilt was another. Neither required love. "Did your mother leave?" Elias asked. Adrian's gaze stilled. She returned to the main estate. "That wasn't what I asked." A pause entered the room. Adrian pulled out the chair near the bed but did not sit. The small distance he maintained was careful enough to appear deliberate. "She won't interfere with your recovery." "My recovery," Elias repeated quietly. "Is that what this is?" You nearly collapsed. "I'm pregnant, not broken." Adrian looked at the tray. "Then eat before you become both." It was such a cold, clumsy sentence that Elias should have disliked it. Instead, he almost laughed. Almost. He lifted the spoon and took a mouthful. Partly because his body had betrayed him with hunger, partly because Adrian remained standing as if the entire house would not move until Elias swallowed. The porridge was less bitter than last night. Still bland. Slightly overcooked, but edible. Adrian watched his face with the concentration he usually reserved for quarterly reports. "You made this," Elias said. "The chef made the base. And you interfered." "I adjusted it." "You mean you ruined it less than yesterday?" Adrian's mouth tightened faintly. "That is an improvement." For a moment, the room became dangerously ordinary. Rain-dimmed morning, warm food, an alpha standing beside a bed he had never slept in, an omega eating from a tray prepared with awkward hands. Elias lowered his eyes before the illusion could settle. Ordinary things were dangerous precisely because they asked to be believed. By 9, Adrian had turned pregnancy into an operational system. A private obstetrician was scheduled for weekly visits. Elias's work hours were reduced without consultation. His access card no longer opened the late-night executive floor. 2 housekeepers were instructed to report any missed meals, which Elias considered an act of surveillance until he discovered Adrian had also removed all internal meeting blocks after 6 in the evening from his own calendar. "You can't cancel the Northern Expansion Review," Elias said from the sofa. Reading the updated schedule on his tablet, "I already did." "The board will object." "They object to everything. It keeps them alive." "You can't keep rearranging the company because I feel nauseous." Adrian, who was standing by the window answering messages, did not look up. "You fainting in front of 6 directors also rearranges the company." I didn't faint. You have a devoted relationship with technicalities, and you have a controlling relationship with everything else. That made him look at her at him, fully. Elias hated the momentary slip in his own mind. The old instinct to reduce himself into what powerful families expected an Omega to become: soft, useful, grateful, replaceable. Adrian's eyes sharpened, but his tone stayed even. Tell me what part crosses the line. Adrian said, I'll change it. Elias had prepared for dismissal, not adjustment. The answer caught him unarmed. He closed the tablet. The housekeepers don't report my meals. Fine. And I decide what work I can handle. You decide within medical limits. That still sounds like you deciding. The doctor decides. I enforce. Adrian. It was the first time that morning he had used the Alpha's name without a title or distance. Adrian's hand went still around the phone. The silence afterward felt less like command and more like listening. Elias looked away first. I don't want to become a project. Adrian did not answer immediately. Beyond the glass, the city moved under a low sky, its towers blurred by rain. You're not a project. What am I? Then. The question was too direct. Elias regretted it as soon as it left him. Adrian was very good at managing numbers, contracts, hostile rooms, and people who mistook his quiet for weakness. He was not good at standing before an Omega carrying his child and naming the shape of the space between them. You're Elias, Adrian said at last. It should not have mattered. It was not even an answer. Yet Elias felt it settle somewhere he had not meant to leave open. The first prenatal appointment under Adrian's supervision became a spectacle only because Adrian did not understand how not to create one. He arrived at the private clinic with 2 bodyguards, 1 assistant, a driver, and a folder of questions typed in bullet points. Elias stopped just outside the entrance and stared at the procession behind them. Are we attending a checkup or acquiring the hospital? Adrian turned. Security is standard. For your overseas negotiations? Perhaps not for my uterus. The assistant coughed into his fist. Adrian looked at the bodyguards. Wait outside. And the assistant? He has the medical schedule. I can read. The assistant disappeared so quickly that Elias suspected every employee at Lou Holdings had dreamed of witnessing someone dismiss Adrian's staff on his behalf. Adrian held the clinic door open. His expression did not change, but Elias thought he saw discomfort at the corner of his eyes. Not anger, adjustment, inside. The waiting room smelled faintly of disinfectant and warm milk. Couples sat with folders and scarves, leaning close over small private worlds. Elias felt Adrian's presence beside him like a wall solid, severe, impossible to ignore. When the nurse called his name, Adrian stood as well. You don't have to come in, Elias said. I know. That means you can stay here. I know that too. The examination room was too bright. Elias lay on the bed, shirt lifted just enough for the probe, and tried not to feel exposed. Adrian stood near the door at first, hands clasped behind his back. When the monitor filled with grainy shadows, the doctor pointed to a tiny flicker. Here, the heartbeat is present. Adrian took 1 step forward. It was such a small movement that no one else reacted. Elias did. He turned his head and found Adrian staring at the screen with the kind of absolute stillness that did not come from indifference, but from containment. The living glacier. People called him a man polished by cold until no one could see the river trapped beneath. Is it normal? Adrian asked. Yes, the doctor said gently. For 6 weeks. This is a good sign. Adrian nodded once. His gaze did not leave the monitor. Elias looked back at the ceiling. For reasons he could not defend, his throat tightened. After the appointment, while Elias sat in the corridor waiting for printed instructions, the elevator at the end of the hall malfunctioned between floors. It was not serious. Only a brief, mechanical shudder, but a pregnant beta inside panicked when the doors finally opened. Her partner had stepped away to pay a bill. She clutched the wall, breathing too fast, her scent turning sour with fear. Adrian moved before the nurses did. He did not touch her without permission. He simply stood at a respectful distance, lowered his pheromone pressure until even Elias felt the air clear, and said in a voice stripped of its usual edge, "Look at me. Breathe slowly. The floor is stable now. Your partner is coming." The beta's frightened eyes fixed on him. Adrian removed his suit jacket and held it toward a nurse. "Give her something warm. Call obstetrics. No crowding." He handled the moment with an efficiency so gentle it hurt to watch. Elias sat very still, the printed instructions folded in his lap. The beta's breathing eased. Her partner returned, pale with gratitude. Adrian stepped back at once, accepting no thanks. No emotional residue. He returned to Elias's side, as if nothing had happened. "You're good at that," Elias said. "At what?" "Being careful with frightened people." Adrian looked down at him. "I frightened her less than the elevator did." "That wasn't what I meant." "I know." Again, the same evasion. Elias turned the papers over in his hands. He should have been reassured. Adrian's gentleness was real. He had just seen it offered to someone who could give him nothing. Yet the realization did not comfort him. It opened a colder possibility. Perhaps Adrian had not become gentle because of Elias. Perhaps pregnancy had merely given him a context in which gentleness was useful. On the way home, Adrian received a call from the office. Elias listened to his clipped replies with half-closed eyes. "No. Move the vote to Thursday. If they threaten withdrawal, let them. We are not negotiating from hunger." A pause. "I'm aware of the loss," I said Thursday. When he ended the call, Elias asked, "How much did you lose by leaving today?" "Nothing unrecoverable." "That isn't an answer. It's the only relevant one. You're doing this too easily." Adrian looked at him. "Would you prefer I make it difficult?" "I would prefer to understand why." Outside, afternoon light broke briefly through the rain, silvering the glass towers around them. Adrian's profile stayed unreadable. "Because there are things more important than a meeting." Elias almost believed him. That was the worst part. 2 days later, Julian Vale returned from abroad with a bouquet of white camellias and a smile soft enough to pass as harmless. He appeared during afternoon tea at the Liu residence, announced by Helena's personal aide while Adrian was still at the office. Elias met him in the east sitting room, the same room where Helena had discussed his future as though he were furniture to be relocated. Julian was an omega, elegant in the effortless way of people raised among old money. His coat was pale grey, his gloves spotless, his pheromones refined and faint. He looked at Elias's abdomen for only a second before smiling. "So you're Elias Wen?" Elias accepted the tea poured by the servant. "And you are?" "Julian Vale. Adrian and I grew up together." He placed the flowers on the table. "I heard the news from Aunt Helena. Congratulations." There it was. Aunt Helena. A closeness displayed with perfect manners. "Thank you," Elias said. Julian sat opposite him. "Adrian must be very attentive. He has always been responsible once something becomes his duty." The word duty entered softly, dressed as praise. Elias lifted his cup. "You know him well." "Well enough to know he rarely changes." Julian's smile dimmed, becoming almost sympathetic. "When we were younger, He said something I never forgot. Personal attachment makes people negligent. Family duty does not. It sounded cruel then. But later I understood. Adrian was raised to protect the Lou name before himself. And now Julian glanced toward the staircase, toward the rooms Elias occupied but did not own. Now he has an heir to protect. The tea was warm in Elias's hand. He placed it down before his fingers could tighten around the porcelain. You came to tell me this. I came because Aunt Helena worries. Adrian can be harsh, but he is not heartless. If he seems attentive, please don't misunderstand him too deeply. He will do what is proper. He always does. Elias studied Julian's face. There was no obvious malice there. Only something quieter and more polished regret. Envy. Perhaps fear of being displaced from a life he had once imagined belonging to him. It made the cruelty more difficult to reject. Cartoon villains were easy. Persuasive people were dangerous because they used truths as knives. Mr. Vale, Elias said, do you usually warn strangers out of kindness? Julian's expression changed by less than a breath. Only when kindness may prevent disappointment. Then I'll remember your kindness. When Julian left, the camellias remained on the table, white and flawless, their scent faint enough to be acceptable. Elias looked at them for a long time. Then he carried them to the garden himself and left them beneath the rain. Adrian returned late. Elias was in the kitchen, staring at a pot of soup that had begun to bubble unevenly. The chef had prepared dinner. But the soup was Adrian's work. Elias recognized the handwriting on the recipe card beside the stove. He also recognized the quiet irritation in himself when he realized he had been waiting for it. You shouldn't be standing this long, Adrian said from the doorway. And you shouldn't abandon soup over fire. I had a call. It almost became evidence. Adrian crossed the kitchen and lowered the flame. His coat was still damp at the shoulders. He looked tired in a way the company would never see. Elias watched him stir the soup with stiff concentration and thought of Julian's voice. Once something becomes his duty, Julian came by. Elias said. The spoon paused, then continued. I know. Your mother told you. Security did. Of course. Elias smiled faintly. Should I be offended that even visitors are reported faster than my meals? I stopped the meal reports. That isn't the point. Adrian turned off the stove. What did he say? He congratulated me. Adrian's expression cooled. What else? That you've always been responsible. The kitchen seemed to narrow. Adrian set the spoon down with care. Elias. He said personal attachment makes people negligent. Family duty does not. The silence that followed was enough of an answer. Adrian had said it once, perhaps years ago, perhaps before he had learned what loneliness looked like when folded into another person's coat pocket. But he had said it. I was 20. Adrian said, and now you're older. Yes. Does that make it less true? Adrian looked at him across the kitchen island. Between them sat the soup, the recipe card, the small domestic evidence of a man trying to become something he did not know how to be. Elias wanted, suddenly and bitterly, to knock it all aside, not because he hated the effort, but because he had begun to need it. I don't know how to answer that in a way you'll believe tonight, Adrian said. It was the most honest thing he had said all week. Elias felt his anger falter, and that frightened him more than rage. Then don't answer. He turned to leave, but dizziness caught him halfway to the door. It was brief. A grey tilt of the room. Adrian reached him before he could steady himself on the counter. One arm came around his back. Not possessive. Not rough. Simply there. Elias froze. Adrian froze too, as if the contact had startled them both. You need to sit, Adrian said quietly. I'm fine. You're lying. So are you. Adrian did not release him. His scent remained restrained. But beneath the control there was something darker, unsettled, almost afraid. Elias felt it and hated that his own body responded with a fragile easing, as if some primitive part of him trusted what his mind refused to accept. Adrian helped him to the chair. His hand withdrew the instant Elias was seated, leaving warmth behind like a question neither dared to ask. The soup tasted better than the first attempt. Too light. Slightly uneven, but warm. Elias ate half a bowl under Adrian's silent watch. When he set the spoon down, Adrian said, Julian won't visit again without your permission. You don't have to manage everyone around me. I'm not managing everyone. Then what are you doing? Adrian looked at the burn mark on his thumb, now fading, learning too late. Perhaps. Elias did not ask what he meant. He was afraid the answer would be tender enough to break through his defenses, or practical enough to rebuild them twice as high. That night, after Adrian left, Elias found a new appointment card placed beside his medication. The next checkup was scheduled for Friday morning. Beneath it, in Adrian's precise handwriting, were 3 words. I'll go too. Elias touched the edge of the card. Outside. The rain had finally stopped. The house was quiet, polished, immenser, somewhere below. Adrian was likely still awake, reviewing documents under cold light, carrying the company with one hand and a bowl of imperfect soup with the other. Elias should have thrown the card away. Instead, he slid it beneath the ultrasound photo and lay awake until dawn, one hand resting over the small, impossible heartbeat inside him. Số từ 1996. Đang Chalent continue, Chapter 3. Continue, Chapter 3. Đã suy nghĩ trong Chin's Chapter 3. The boardroom fell silent not because Adrian Liu had raised his voice, but because he had stopped speaking. On the screen behind him, the emergency projection showed a collapse in the Eastern logistics chain, a contract breach significant enough to erase an entire quarter's profit if mishandled. Around the long table, directors waited with their pens suspended above paper, every face carefully arranged into concern. Adrian stood at the head of the room, one hand resting on the polished surface, the other holding a report he had already read twice. His expression remained severe, immaculate, almost bored. Then his phone vibrated. No one should have been able to hear it beneath the hum of the projector and the muffled rain against the windows. Yet everyone saw the change. Not in his face. Adrian's face was still a disciplined thing. The change happened in his fingers. They tightened once around the phone before he looked down. Elias Wen. Fall. Mild bleeding. Being taken to Astor Private Hospital. For 3 seconds, Adrian did not move. The room around him continued existing in its usual hierarchy of fear and obedience, unaware that something beneath that hierarchy had cracked open. Then he closed the report and said, Vice President Han will continue. An older director half rose from his chair. Mr. Liu, the suppliers are demanding an answer within the hour. Give them one. With respect, this requires your signature. Adrian was already walking toward the door. Then wait for my signature. The director's composure slipped. If we delay, the loss could exceed. Adrian turned back. His voice remained low. I heard you the first time. No one spoke again. He left without taking his coat. In the elevator, the mirrored walls threw his reflection back at him from all sides. Dark suit, straight shoulders, unreadable eyes. Only his breath betrayed him. It came too measured, too controlled. The way a man breathed when control was the last object left in his hands. At the hospital, Elias was not in danger. That was what the doctor said first. Perhaps because Adrian's face had made the nurse forget the order of explanations. Not in danger. Slight bleeding caused by a minor fall. The fetus still had cardiac activity. Observation required overnight. Avoid stress. Avoid prolonged standing. Avoid emotional agitation. Adrian listened to every word. Beside him, the doctor kept glancing at the consent form already signed with a forceful line of black ink. Adrian had signed 3 documents in under a minute admission. Treatment authorization. Emergency contact confirmation. On the 3rd, his handwriting had changed. The final stroke of his surname cut through the paper slightly. "Can I see him?" Adrian asked. The doctor nodded. "He's awake. Please don't pressure him." Adrian paused outside the ward before entering. Through the narrow glass panel, Elias looked smaller than he ever did in the office. Not weak. Elias never looked weak, even in a hospital bed, with his complexion drained pale and an IV line taped to the back of his hand. There was a kind of restrained dignity in the way he held himself. He was looking out the window, where the rain had turned the city into blurred silver. Adrian pushed the door open. Elias turned. "You left the board meeting." "It ended." "No, it didn't. Then it continued without me." Elias's eyes moved over him. Adrian had arrived without a coat. Rain darkening his shoulders. His tie slightly uneven from the hurried drive. For a moment, Elias seemed to have forgotten how to keep his face empty. Something like bewilderment flickered there, followed quickly by caution. The doctor said, "It's not serious." Elias said, "I heard. Then you can go back." Adrian walked to the foot of the bed but did not come closer. "No. It's a business crisis. You are in a hospital. I fell because I was careless, not because the company needs to lose millions." The sentence was too controlled. Adrian heard the guilt beneath it. Thin and sharp. He had heard that tone before in employees who expected punishment, in subordinates who believed every accident had to be paid for immediately before someone stronger named the price. He disliked realizing Elias used that tone with him. "Did someone blame you?" Adrian asked. Elias looked away. "You don't need to interrogate the furniture." "Elias." The name landed between them with unusual weight. Elias closed his eyes briefly. "I was in the archive room. The step stool shifted. That's all." "Why were you in the archive room?" "I needed the original supplier agreements." "You were supposed to work remotely." "I did. The files weren't digitized." "You could have asked someone." "I could have done many things." Adrian's jaw tightened, "and chose the one that put you on a ladder." "It was a step stool." That distinction again. Elias gave him a faint, tired look. "If you came here to scold me, please do it efficiently. I'm not in the mood for a long performance." Adrian said nothing. He pulled the visitor's chair closer and sat down. The movement was quiet. But Elias watched it as if Adrian had done something far more alarming than speak. Adrian opened the hospital's printed instructions. "Read them once, then read them again." The fluorescent light fell cold over his face, emphasizing the sleeplessness at the corners of his eyes. "You're staying?" Elias asked. "Yes." "Why?" Adrian's fingers paused on the paper. "Because you shouldn't wake up alone in a hospital." The words were not soft. Adrian's voice still carried the rough edges of a man unused to offering anything directly. But Elias had no defense prepared for that answer. He looked at Adrian for a long moment, then lowered his gaze to the blanket. "You keep saying things like that." Elias said, "What kind of things?" "Things that sound almost kind when I'm too tired to distrust them." Adrian looked up. The air between them shifted. Not warmer exactly, but more dangerous. "Then distrust them tomorrow." Despite himself, Elias almost smiled. Exhaustion loosened some strictness in him. It showed in the way his lashes lowered slowly, in the way his hand relaxed beside the IV line. Adrian saw it and did not move. The lesson of the past week remained: fresh care given too forcefully became another kind of harm. Outside, the rain grew heavier. The hospital corridor carried faint sounds: a nurse's shoes, distant wheels, a child crying somewhere on another floor. Elias drifted into uneasy sleep near midnight. Adrian stayed seated beside him, reading the pregnancy handbook he had taken from Elias's bedside drawer 2 days earlier. Several pages were already marked. Foods to avoid. Warning signs. Emotional instability during early pregnancy. Partner support. The phrase irritated him. Partner support. As if one could learn how to stand beside another person through headings and subheadings. As if Adrian had not spent his entire life mistaking provision for presence. At 2 a.m, Elias woke to pain low in his abdomen. It was not severe, but fear came faster than reason. His hand moved under the blanket, pressing instinctively over the small life inside him. Before he could reach the call button, Adrian was beside the bed. What is it? Nothing. It's passing. Adrian pressed the call button anyway. Elias wanted to object, but another small cramp stole his breath. Adrian's hand hovered near his shoulder and stopped there, suspended in permissionless space. "May I?" Adrian asked. Elias stared at him through the dim light. The question itself undid something. Adrian Liu, who signed acquisitions without blinking, who dismissed directors with a glance, who commanded rooms into obedience, stood beside a hospital bed, asking whether he could touch his own bonded spouse. Elias gave the smallest nod. Adrian's hand settled on his shoulder. His palm was warm through the thin hospital gown, not gripping, not claiming, only anchoring. His pheromones remained suppressed, but a faint trace escaped anyway. Clean and winter cold, edged with something steady. Elias breathed in before he could stop himself. His body recognized the bond with humiliating trust. His mind followed more slowly. Unwilling, afraid. The nurse arrived. The doctor was called. The pain passed. Nothing had worsened. Normal, they said. Observation. They repeated. Adrian listened, as if memorizing a verdict. When they were alone again, Elias whispered, "You're frightened." Adrian withdrew his hand. "That wasn't an accusation," Elias said. "It sounded like one." "No, I just didn't know you could be." Adrian stood beside the bed, the pale hospital light cutting his face into hard angles. "Neither did I." The honesty came too quietly. Elias had no answer for it. He turned his face toward the window. But his hand, perhaps weakened by exhaustion, perhaps guided by something less defensible, moved across the blanket. It found Adrian's hand where it rested near the rail. Elias did not hold it. He only placed his fingers over the back of it. Adrian went completely still. Neither of them looked down. That made it easier to pretend the gesture meant less than it did. By morning, the bleeding had stopped. The doctor recommended another day of rest at home. Adrian arranged the discharge himself, rejected 3 unnecessary staff arrivals, and helped Elias into the car without touching more than his elbow. Elias noticed every restraint. Restraint had once made Adrian seem distant. Now it made him seem dangerously attentive. At home, Helena Liu was waiting in the main hall. She wore a dark green suit and pearls, her silver-streaked hair arranged with impeccable care. Julian stood beside her, holding a folder he did not pretend was casual. The sight turned the warmth from the car ride into something brittle. "Elias," Helena said, coming forward with a concern, polished, smooth enough to reflect nothing real. "We heard about the fall. How alarming." Adrian stepped slightly in front of Elias. He needs rest. Of course, that is why I came. Helena's gaze moved from Adrian to Elias. Pausing briefly at his abdomen, the household has become too loose. An Omega in his condition should not be managing work files or wandering through archives. I've arranged for a specialized caregiver to supervise him. No, Elias said. The word was quiet. Everyone heard it. Helena smiled faintly. You misunderstand. This is not a restriction. It is protection. I said no. Julian lowered his eyes. Almost sympathetic. Aunt Helena is only worried. After yesterday, anyone would be. Elias's fingers tightened once around the strap of his bag. Adrian noticed. Adrian always noticed. But he also saw what Elias saw, the folder in Julian's hand. The careful timing. The way concern could arrive carrying locks. My spouse does not need a supervisor, Adrian said. Helena's smile thinned. Your spouse nearly endangered the air yesterday. Silence dropped through the hall. The air, not the child, not Elias. The air. Adrian's face did not change quickly. It froze first, as if his body refused the insult before his mind shaped a response. Elias felt something in himself go cold. He had known this, had heard enough to expect it. But expectation did not blunt the pain. It only made him ashamed for hurting. I'm tired, Elias said. He did not wait for permission. He walked toward the stairs. Adrian turned as if to follow, but Helena spoke behind him. Adrian, we need to discuss practical matters. Elias continued upward. Every step required composure. Behind him, he heard Adrian's voice. Low and dangerous. Not today. In his room, Elias sat on the edge of the bed and opened his bag. The hospital papers were inside, along with the appointment card Adrian had written on. I'll go too. He touched the words once, then slid the card beneath the pillow again. His hands were steady now. That steadiness frightened him. It was the kind that came before decisions. Downstairs, Adrian faced his mother in the east sitting room. Helena did not sit. You are making this unnecessarily personal. It is personal. Pregnancy often creates emotional confusion, especially in Omegas with unstable family backgrounds. You cannot let guilt lead the household. Adrian's eyes sharpened. Do not speak about his background. I am speaking about risk. Elias is intelligent. Yes, but prideful. He refused help and ended up in a hospital. If something happens to the child because you indulge his independence, the board will ask questions. The family will ask questions. Julian stood near the tea table. Silent. His presence was quieter than Helena's, but not harmless. Adrian looked at the folder in his hands. What is that? Julian hesitated before offering it. A proposal. For postpartum arrangements. Aunt Helena thought it would be better to draft options early, before emotions make discussion difficult. Adrian did not open the folder. Leave. Julian's face paled slightly. Helena's tone hardened. Adrian. I said leave. This time, there was enough alpha pressure in the room to make the glass on the table tremble faintly. Julian lowered his head and left with the folder still in his hands. Helena watched him go, then turned back to her son. You think this proves devotion? She asked. Throwing people out, cancelling meetings, standing guard beside a hospital bed. You are confusing anxiety with love. The word love struck the room with quiet violence. Adrian said nothing. Helena saw the silence and mistook it for uncertainty. You were not raised for this. You do not know how to belong to someone. Protect the child. Provide for Elias. But do not pretend you can become a husband simply because he looked fragile in a hospital bed. Adrian looked toward the staircase. He thought of Elias's hand over his in the dark, light as falling snow and heavier than any contract he had ever signed. Perhaps not, he said. Helena's expression eased a fraction. Then Adrian looked back at her. But that is no longer your decision. By evening, the house had rearranged itself around a new boundary. Helena was gone. Julian's visitor permissions were revoked. The staff moved with the careful relief of people who had witnessed a storm pass overhead without striking them. Elias remained upstairs, expecting no explanation and receiving none until the sky darkened. Adrian knocked before entering. Elias was standing by the window, wrapped in a pale cardigan. Looking down at the wet garden where the camellias Julian had brought lay ruined beneath the shrubs. He did not turn immediately. "Your mother left," Elias said. "Yes. And Julian, he won't come again. Because I disliked him. Because he crossed a line." Elias gave a soft laugh. "There are many lines in this house. I never know which ones belong to me." Adrian stepped into the room but kept distance between them. In his hand was a new folder. Elias saw it and went still. "What is that?" "Your medical leave approval, adjusted work authority, direct access to files from home. No staff reports unless you request assistance. No caregiver." Elias stared at him. "You drafted policy changes." "Yes. Because I fell. Because I listened late." That answer should not have hurt. It did anyway. Elias looked down at the folder, then away. "You don't have to keep choosing me in public if it will cost you." Adrian's eyes darkened. "You think today was public? It was your mother. That makes it worse, not better." Elias had no defense against that. His fingers brushed the edge of the curtain. Outside, rainwater clung to the glass in thin, trembling lines. "You left an important meeting yesterday," he said. "I did." "For me." Adrian did not answer at once. The room held its breath with them. Elias had asked too directly again, but he no longer had strength for safer questions. "For you," Adrian said. Then, after a pause, "And for the child, but not only for the child." The words were careful, almost awkward. Elias felt them enter slowly, like warmth returning to fingers after too long in cold water. Not a confession, not enough to heal anything, but enough to make distrust harder. He sat down on the bed because his legs had begun to feel unreliable. Adrian immediately shifted as if to help, then stopped himself. Elias noticed and, after a long moment, extended his hand. "Just help me with the pillow," he said. Adrian crossed the room. It was a small surrender from both of them. Adrian adjusted the pillows behind Elias's back with the seriousness of a man handling evidence in a delicate case. Elias watched him from close enough to see the faint shadow beneath his eyes. Neither mentioned the hospital, or Helena, or the hand held in darkness. Some things could only survive if left unnamed for a while. When Adrian finished, Elias caught his sleeve. Adrian looked down. "Stay until I fall asleep," Elias said. The request was spoken evenly, almost coldly, as if Elias were negotiating another clause. But his fingers remained curled in Adrian's sleeve. Adrian sat in the chair beside the bed. "All right. You can read your documents." "I know." But he did not open his phone. He sat quietly while the room dimmed around them. Elias closed his eyes. For the first time since hearing Helena's voice in the corridor, sleep approached without feeling like surrender. Near midnight, after Elias's breathing had evened out, Adrian leaned forward to pick up the blanket that had slipped from the bed. As he tucked it over Elias's shoulder, he noticed a corner of paper beneath the pillow, the ultrasound photo, softened by touch. Beside it, the appointment card, with his own handwriting. "I'll go too." Adrian looked at the words for a long time. Then he placed them back carefully, as if returning something sacred to its hiding place. The original marriage contract was kept in a fireproof archive cabinet behind Adrian's study, the sort of place no servant entered without permission and no guest imagined existed. Elias found it because he was not a guest, not quite family, and not naive enough to leave questions unanswered after being called an heir's vessel in his own home. He waited until Adrian left for an early supplier negotiation. The morning was bright after days of rain, but the light made the corridors feel exposed rather than warm. Elias moved slowly, one hand touching the wall whenever dizziness gathered at the edges of his vision. He needed clarity, not betrayal, not reassurance. Clarity could be folded into a plan. The cabinet opened with the emergency code Adrian had once given him during a power outage. Adrian had not changed it. Elias hated that detail. Trust, found in the wrong place, became another kind of cruelty. The contract was thicker than he remembered. During the signing, he had read the medical confidentiality clauses and compensation limits with the cold attention of someone negotiating dignity from disadvantage. But he had been feverish then. Adrian standing across the table like a closed door. The Liu family lawyer had said, standard protective language. Elias had believed him only enough to survive. Now he found the clause on page 27. Any child conceived during the legal bond would be recognized as belonging to the Liu household line. In case of parental dispute, primary custodial authority would default to the Alpha Party until reviewed by a private family tribunal appointed through Liu estate governance. The words were polite. That made them worse. Elias read the paragraph 3 times. His pulse remained steady. An old discipline. Panic was a luxury for people who expected rescue. He sat down carefully before his knees decided for him. On the corner of the desk lay another pregnancy handbook, with a page marked on prenatal anxiety. It would have been easier if Adrian had never learned tenderness. Then Elias could have hated him cleanly. But a man who burned soup at midnight left boardrooms and asked permission before touching him could still be the same man who had signed away his future in advance. A soft knock came from the study door. Julian Vale stood outside, dressed in pale wool. A document envelope held loosely in one hand. The household staff should not have allowed him in. That they had meant either Helena had reopened a door, or Julian had never truly left. "You shouldn't be here," Elias said. Julian's gaze moved to the cabinet, then back to him. "Neither should you. Perhaps. Did Helena send you?" "No," Julian smiled. But there was weariness inside it today. "Aunt Helena sends lawyers. I came because I thought you deserved to know what kind of room you're standing in." Kindness again. Experience. Julian stepped in without invitation. The Liu household does not seize loudly. It prepares documents, builds procedures, and waits until fear makes obedience look reasonable. That sounds personal. It is. Julian's fingers tightened on the envelope. "I once believed Adrian might choose something outside the family's design. I was young enough to think silence meant conflict rather than agreement." Elias studied him. For the first time, Julian looked less like an enemy than a scar that had learned good manners. It did not make him harmless. It made him harder to dismiss. "Did Adrian know about the custody clause?" Elias asked. Julian's expression softened with a pity Elias despised. "Adrian signs nothing blindly." The answer landed exactly where Julian intended. A reasonable truth. A precise wound. Adrian did sign nothing blindly. He had read every contract in his life, as if affection were an error hidden between clauses. Julian placed the envelope on the desk. "Aunt Helena's lawyer prepared a postpartum residence proposal. I don't agree with her methods. But pretending the document doesn't exist won't protect you. Why give it to me? Because if you stay ignorant, you'll lose before you realize there was a battle. He paused at the door. And because I know what it means to be useful to the Liu family until you ask to be loved. After Julian left, Elias opened the envelope. The proposal was elegant. Separate postpartum villa, private nursing staff, generous settlement, scheduled visitation, subject to paternal discretion, public explanation to preserve Elias's reputation, a final line offering psychological support for emotional adjustment after separation from infant care. Elias placed the document back in the envelope with steady hands. That evening, Adrian returned to find him in the small reading room rather than the kitchen or bedroom. Elias had changed into a neat shirt and soft trousers, his tablet open to work reports. He looked better at first glance. Too composed. Adrian noticed immediately. "Did you rest today?" Adrian asked. "Yes." "What did you eat?" "Enough." The answer was smooth, impersonal. Adrian set his coat over the chair. "Elias, I'm reviewing the logistics updates. Your meeting went badly. You don't need to concern yourself with that." "Then I won't." He said it without resentment. That was what disturbed Adrian. Elias's anger had edges. This politeness had walls. Adrian saw the untouched fruit beside the sofa. The vitamins arranged in a perfect line. The blanket folded instead of used. Small evidence of compliance without trust. If something happened, tell me, Adrian said. Elias looked up at him. His eyes were clear, almost gentle. Nothing happened. Adrian had never believed less in a sentence. Over the next 3 days, Elias became faultless. He attended appointments, ate when reminded, answered work messages during approved hours, and thanked Adrian for every minor arrangement. He no longer argued about bodyguards. He no longer teased Adrian's cooking. When Adrian placed a bowl of fish soup before him, Elias said, "Thank you. It smells good," and finished half without comment. Though Adrian knew he disliked the ginger, the house became peaceful in the way winter lakes were peaceful before the ice broke. Adrian left the office earlier, moved 2 meetings online, and learned how to peel apples into uneven spirals because a nutrition article claimed sliced fruit oxidized too quickly. Elias accepted each offering with quiet courtesy. Every thank you placed another locked door between them. On the 4th night, Adrian found him in the unfinished nursery. The walls were pale. Rain tapped gently at the windows again. Elias stood in the middle of the room, arms folded loosely, looking at nothing. "I didn't ask them to prepare this," Adrian said from the doorway. "I know. Do you dislike it?" "No." "Then why are you standing here like you're saying goodbye?" Elias turned his head. The question had slipped out too raw, and both of them heard it. "Do you ever feel," Elias said slowly, "that some rooms are built for people before anyone asks whether they want to enter?" Adrian came in, stopping several steps away. "Yes." That surprised him. "You do. My father's study was prepared before I could write my name. My office was prepared before I finished university. Most rooms in my life were waiting before I arrived." "And did you enter them willingly?" "No." Adrian looked at the bare wall, where a crib might one day stand. "But I stayed long enough that people called it choice." For a moment, Elias saw him with painful clarity, not the powerful alpha everyone feared, but a child raised inside polished expectations until obedience became indistinguishable from character. It weakened his resolve. Compassion was dangerous because it made escape feel like betrayal. Adrian turned to him. "The house feels unbearable when you're not in it." Elias stopped breathing. Adrian seemed to realize only after speaking how much he had exposed. His jaw tightened. When you were in the hospital, I came back to retrieve your documents. The rooms were the same. Everything was in place. It felt wrong. Elias looked down at his hands. There were many things he could have said. That a house could miss a person and still imprison them. That being wanted was not the same as being safe. That he wanted, terribly, to believe him. Instead, Elias asked, "Did you read the contract before signing it?" Adrian stilled. There, the smallest pause. Perhaps surprise. Perhaps guilt. Perhaps merely calculation. Elias did not know. He only knew that the pause broke something. Yes. Adrian said, a simple answer. A fatal one. Elias nodded. I see. Adrian stepped forward. If you mean the custody clause, so you remember it. I never intended to use it. But you signed it. Yes. The honesty was unbearable. Lies might have given Elias anger enough to stay and fight. Honesty left him only grief. Adrian seemed to understand too late that truth without context could still cut like betrayal. At the time, I thought the clause was irrelevant. Adrian said, "We did not plan for a child. But the clause planned for one." His voice remained calm. Adrian looked at him as if he would rather face any board, any enemy, any collapse of empire than the composure on Elias's face. I should have removed it. Adrian said, "Yes." I should have told you. Yes. Rain thickened against the window. Elias stepped around him toward the door. Adrian did not block him. That restraint, once almost tender, now hurt in another way. Perhaps he truly would not force Elias. Perhaps he believed there was still time. The next morning, Adrian left for a meeting with Helena's estate lawyer. Elias saw them from the second-floor corridor, Adrian in a black coat, Helena beside him. The lawyer opening a leather folder as they crossed the entrance hall. He heard only fragments. Custody language. Public registration. Before the birth, Adrian's voice followed, low and clipped. Elias could not catch the words. He did not need to. The scene arranged itself neatly into the shape his fear already understood. By noon, he had packed. Not much. A few clothes, medical records, cash withdrawn over the past week, the postpartum proposal, and the ultrasound photo. He hesitated before Adrian's study, then entered once more. Adrian's wallet lay on the desk beside courier forms. He had forgotten it in his hurry. Elias should not have opened it. Still, some desperate part of him wanted evidence of the man who had sat beside his hospital bed. Inside, behind the identification card, was a folded copy of the ultrasound image. Elias stood very still. Adrian had kept one too, not in a file, not in a drawer, but in his wallet, worn faintly at the crease as if touched more than once. The discovery nearly ruined everything. Elias pressed a hand over his mouth and closed his eyes until the wave passed. Then he took the photo, not because it belonged only to him, because if he left it behind, he might come back for it. Rain returned by evening. Elias waited until the household changed shifts, until the side entrance camera loop he had prepared began its blind spot, until the city beyond the gates blurred into grey. He wore a loose coat, carried a small suitcase, and moved with the careful steadiness of someone protecting both a child and a breaking heart. At the threshold, he looked back once. The house stood bright against the rain, every window lit, every room arranged around a life that had almost persuaded him to stay. Somewhere in that house were burned recipe cards, marked medical books, a chair beside his bed, and a man who had learned too late that protection without truth could become betrayal. Elias placed one hand over his abdomen. "I'm sorry," he whispered. though he did not know whether he was speaking to the child, to Adrian, or to the version of himself that had wanted to be chosen. Then he stepped into the rain and disappeared beyond the gate. The soup was still warm when Adrian came home to an empty house. It sat on the stove under a low flame, pale steam curling up in tired threads. He had made it before leaving for the lawyer's office, correcting the salt twice because Elias had become sensitive to anything too sharp. On the counter lay a bowl, a spoon, and a small plate of peeled pears, already browning at the edges. Adrian stood in the kitchen doorway, with rain on his coat and the folder in his hand. And for several seconds the house offered him only ordinary silence. Then he saw the absence. Elias's slippers were not beside the kitchen entrance. The pale cardigan he wore on cold evenings was missing from the chair near the reading room. The vitamins on the bedside table had been taken, but the glass of water remained. In the bedroom, the blanket was folded with painful neatness. Beneath the pillow, nothing waited. No ultrasound photo, no appointment card, no quiet proof that Elias had once trusted the room enough to hide fragile things there. Adrian did not call his name. Some part of him already knew there would be no answer. The staff gathered in the hall with frightened faces. The butler explained the shift change, the side entrance, the brief camera failure. Every sentence sounded like an apology prepared for punishment. Adrian listened without interrupting. His expression did not break. That frightened them more than anger would have. "Bring me the visitor logs for the past week," he said. The butler bowed too quickly. "Yes, sir." And no one contacts the main estate. A pause trembled through the hall. Adrian looked at him. No one. When he entered his study, the fireproof cabinet was not fully aligned. A difference of 2 millimeters. Perhaps less. Anyone else would have missed it. Adrian stood before it, hand resting on the metal edge, and understood with a coldness that made breathing difficult. Elias had read the contract. The folder in Adrian's hand suddenly felt absurd. Inside were revised legal documents, signed that morning after a 2-hour argument with Helena's estate lawyer, removal of the custody default clause, termination of private tribunal language, recognition of equal parental authority, and a separate statement that no Lou family representative could negotiate postpartum arrangements without Elias's written consent. Adrian had gone to erase the blade. Elias had only seen him carrying it. He opened the cabinet and found the original contract slightly shifted. Page 27 had been marked by touch. Not folded. Not damaged. Elias had always been careful even with things that hurt him. Adrian sat behind the desk. The room was perfectly arranged. Elias had once called it a room built before anyone asked whether Adrian wished to enter. The memory struck with quiet brutality. He had thought himself different from this house because he did not shout, did not threaten, did not use affection as bait. But he had signed a clause that could steal a child from the person carrying it, then failed to speak of it until fear had done the speaking for him. His phone rang. Helena. Adrian watched the screen until it stopped. Then he called Julian. Julian answered after the third ring. Adrian. You visited Elias. Silence. Do not waste my time, Adrian said. Julian's breath trembled faintly through the line. He deserved to know. What did you give him? A proposal your mother's lawyer prepared. Adrian closed his eyes once. The control he had inherited from childhood had never felt more like rot. And you thought handing a frightened, pregnant Omega a separation plan was mercy. I thought ignorance was worse. You thought if he left, there might still be a place beside me for the memory of you. The line went very quiet. When Julian spoke again, his voice had lost its polish. You don't get to accuse me of wanting what you never valued. I waited years for you to look at anyone as if they mattered. Then he came. And you learned soup. Appointments. Fear. Do you know how humiliating it is to watch someone receive the version of you I once begged for? Adrian looked toward the empty chair Elias had used while reviewing files. Yes. Julian gave a small, bitter laugh. No, you don't. I do now. He ended the call before Julian could answer. There was no satisfaction in cutting him off. No anger clean enough to hold. Only the widening recognition that every person around Elias had spoken into Adrian's silence and found it available. Helena arrived before midnight, despite his order. She entered the east sitting room with the dignity of a woman who had survived scandals by refusing to name them. Adrian stood beside the cold fireplace. The revised custody documents spread on the table between them. You look unwell, Helena said. He's gone. Her face changed only slightly. Relief came first. She hid it quickly. But Adrian saw it. After that, something inside him became very calm. You should let him calm down, she said. Pregnant omegas can become impulsive. Once he realizes the difficulty of being alone, he'll negotiate. Negotiate, Adrian repeated. I did not create this situation. You did. By refusing to define boundaries, he began to believe attention meant permanence. Adrian looked at his mother. For most of his life, Helena had been the voice of structure. Survive first. Feel later. Never let longing become evidence. He had mistaken her restraint for strength because he was a child with no other model. He is my spouse, Adrian said. He is the omega who became pregnant during a bond arrangement. He is Elias. Helena's mouth tightened. Names do not protect families. Documents do. Adrian slid the revised papers toward her, then read. She did. Her composure sharpened with every page. You signed these. This morning, without consulting the estate council. Yes. You are giving him equal authority over a Lou heir. I am recognizing his existing authority over his own child. That is sentiment speaking. No. Adrian's voice remained low. Sentiment was cooking soup and thinking it would compensate for silence. This is consequence. Helena stared at him. For the first time, she seemed uncertain whether the son she had raised had merely disobeyed her or quietly left the room she had built for him. If he uses this against you, she asked, then I will have earned it. After she left, Adrian went to Elias's room. He did not sleep there. That would have felt like intrusion. Instead, he sat on the floor beside the bed, back against the frame, listening to rain erase the garden outside. Near dawn, he found a single strand of Elias's hair caught in the blanket. He held it for a moment, then let it go because even grief had limits it should not cross. The search lasted 4 days. Adrian refused the methods his security team offered first. No pheromone tracing through bond registries. No pressure on clinics. No intimidation at transit stations. Find him, he said, without turning him into prey. The order made the work slower. He accepted that as the first useful punishment. Elias, meanwhile, learned that disappearing while pregnant required a stamina he no longer possessed. He traveled under grey skies to a coastal town called Merrow Bay, where the off-season streets smelled of salt, vet rope, and cheap heating oil. The innkeeper asked no questions after seeing cash. The room was narrow but clean, with a window facing a strip of restless sea. For the first 2 days, Elias slept in fragments. He kept his phone off and the curtains half drawn. The child inside him was still too small to move. Yet its presence changed every silence. Hunger arrived suddenly, then vanished. Nausea punished him for standing too quickly. At night, he held the stolen ultrasound photo from Adrian's wallet and hated himself for taking comfort from the crease in the paper. He had thought distance would make things simple. It did not. away from the Lou residence. Adrian's gestures detached from the house and followed him like weather a bowl of ruined congee. A hand asking permission in hospital darkness. The words not only for the child, spoken with terrible care. Elias missed him in details too small to defend. The way Adrian lowered his voice around fear. The way he pretended sliced pears were strategy. The way his silence, after beginning as a wall, had slowly become something Elias leaned against without noticing. But missing someone did not make staying safe. On the fourth morning, Elias went to a small local clinic because the cramping had returned. The doctor there was an older beater with kind eyes and blunt hands. She examined him, frowned at his blood pressure, and asked whether he had a partner nearby. No, Elias said. She gave him a look that suggested she had heard many versions of that answer. Then you need rest twice as seriously. I can manage. People who say that usually cannot. He almost smiled. The doctor gave him supplements, scheduled a follow-up, and told him a storm was expected by evening. Elias stepped out beneath a sky already turning iron dark and stopped. Across the narrow street, Adrian stood in the rain without an umbrella. He looked wrong there, too finely dressed for the weather. Shoulders damp, hair darkened by water. No bodyguards crowded behind him. No assistant hovered with documents. He stood alone beside a closed pharmacy, hands empty, as if he had deliberately brought nothing that could be mistaken for force. Elias's first instinct was to protect his abdomen. Adrian saw the movement. Pain crossed his face so quickly that Elias might have imagined it. I won't take you back, Adrian said. The words came before greeting, before accusation, before explanation. They reached Elias through the rain with startling precision. Elias's throat tightened. Then why are you here? Because your appointment was today. You found my clinic. I found the town. The clinic was a guess. You expect me to believe that? No. Adrian's gaze lowered, then returned to him. But it is true. A truck passed between them, throwing dirty water over the curb. Neither moved. Elias had imagined this moment many times during the past 4 days. In some versions, Adrian was angry. In others, cold. In the most dangerous version, he apologized too beautifully. The man before him looked none of those things. He looked tired, soaked, and stripped of every advantage except honesty. I read the contract. Elias said, I know. You signed it. I did. You kept it from me. Yes. Rain struck Adrian's face and ran down the sharp line of his jaw. He did not defend himself. Elias wished he would. Defense would have given him somewhere to place the hurt. I removed it. Adrian said, before I knew you were gone. I was with the lawyer that morning to erase the custody clause and restrict my mother's authority. I should have told you before fear made the truth meaningless. Elias's fingers curled into his coat. Somewhere behind him, the clinic door opened and closed. Life continued with cruel indifference. Do you think that fixes it? He asked. No. Then what do you want? Adrian looked at him for a long moment. To be present for what you allow. Nothing more. It was too little. It was everything he had wanted. Elias hated the confusion so fiercely his eyes burned. You can stand outside. Then, he said. Adrian nodded. All right? And he did, for the next hour. Elias remained inside the clinic while the rain thickened into storm. Adrian stayed beneath the awning across the street, never approaching the door. The nurses whispered. The doctor glanced through the window, then at Elias, but asked nothing. Elias sat with one hand over his abdomen and tried not to look. He failed often enough to know Adrian had not moved. Near dusk, the first contraction bent him forward. It was sharper than the cramps before. low and pulling. A pain that took his breath and left cold sweat at his temples. The doctor called his name. Elias tried to answer, but the second wave came too quickly. Across the street, Adrian saw the clinic staff move. He ran. This time, when he entered, Elias did not tell him to leave. He was on the examination bed, one hand gripping the sheet, face bloodless with terror he could no longer hide. Adrian stopped beside him, soaked through, breathing hard. "Ilias," he said. The lights flickered once. The doctor cursed under her breath and shouted for the backup generator. Outside, thunder broke over the town, so loudly the windows trembled. Inside the small clinic, the monitor blinked, steadied, then went dark. For one suspended second, there was only rain, darkness, and Elias's hand reaching blindly across the sheet. Adrian caught it. The backup generator did not start on the first try. In the darkness, the clinic seemed to shrink around the sound of rain. Elias lay on the examination bed with Adrian's hand locked around his, the pain moving through him in slow, cruel waves that made every breath feel borrowed. He was not thinking of contracts, or houses, or the Liu family name. Terror stripped dignity down to its smallest shape, please. Not the child. The doctor's voice cut through the dark. Steady only because she forced it to be. Keep him warm. Don't let him sit up. I need light. Adrian removed his coat and folded it over Elias before anyone asked. His shirt was soaked, rainwater dripping from his hair to his collar, but his hand did not loosen. With the other, he took out his phone and turned on the flashlight. The white beam shook once before becoming still. Elias saw it, even through the pain. He saw Adrian force his hand steady. "You're freezing," Elias breathed. "Not relevant. You always say that when something is—" Adrian's face bent over him, pale under the phone light, stripped of its usual distance. Argue later. The absurdity almost pulled a laugh from Elias. But another spasm came, and his fingers dug into Adrian's skin. Adrian did not flinch. His pheromones leaked despite his control. Winter cold and deep. Not pressing down, but surrounding the bed like a wall against the storm. Elias hated that his body trusted it. He hated more that his mind, exhausted and frightened, followed. The generator coughed to life after 3 failed attempts. Yellow light flooded the room in a weak, uneven glow. The monitor restarted with a thin electronic cry. The doctor leaned over Elias, her expression severe, her hands brisk and competent. Adrian stood where she directed him, supporting Elias's shoulder when needed, stepping back when told, obeying every instruction without the smallest trace of pride. Minutes became shapeless. Medication was prepared. A second doctor was called from a nearby hospital. The storm delayed the ambulance. Elias watched rain distort the window and thought, irrationally, that if he could count the seconds between lightning and thunder, he could keep the heartbeat inside him from fading. Then the monitor found it. A small, rapid sound filled the room. Fragile, stubborn, alive. Elias closed his eyes. The breath that left him did not feel like relief at first. It felt like his body had forgotten how to carry so much fear and had set it down all at once. Adrian's hand tightened around his, then loosened immediately, as though he had no right to express what the sound had done to him. The doctor looked at Adrian. The immediate danger has eased, but he needs observation. No stress. No travel tonight. No emotional agitation. I mean that seriously. Adrian nodded, understood. Elias opened his eyes. Stop sounding like you're signing an acquisition. The doctor, to her credit, pretended not to hear. Adrian looked down at him. Something raw moved beneath his controlled expression. But when he spoke, his voice stayed quiet. "I don't know how to sound when I'm afraid." That silenced the room more completely than thunder. Later, after the clinic settled into a tense watchfulness and the rain softened to a grey hiss, Elias was moved to a recovery room with peeling blue wallpaper and a heater that clicked every few minutes. Adrian sat beside the bed, still in his damp shirt, until the doctor threatened to ban him if he caught a fever and became useless. Only then did he accept a towel and an old cardigan from the storage cabinet. Elias watched him from the pillow. "You look ridiculous." "I know. You're not going to defend yourself." "No. That's new." Adrian looked at his hands. There were crescent marks across his knuckles where Elias had gripped him during the pain. "I have defended myself too often in rooms where silence hurt you more than honesty would have." Elias turned his face slightly away. "This is not the part where you say one correct thing and I forgive you." "I know." "Do you?" "Yes." Adrian's voice lowered. "I didn't come here to be forgiven tonight. I came because you were alone." Elias swallowed. His throat still tasted faintly of medicine and fear. "I left because I thought you would take the child." "I know." "You signed the contract." "Yes." "You read the clause." "Yes." Each answer was a stone laid down between them. Not to build a wall this time, perhaps, but a road neither could cross without feeling every step. "I didn't remove it because I thought it would never matter." Adrian said. "That was arrogance, not innocence. I treated danger as harmless because I did not intend to use it. I forgot that something can wound you simply by existing in my name." Elias closed his eyes. The truth was not gentle. It did not ask to be admired. That made it harder to reject. Adrian continued, slowly, as if each word had to be dragged out from a place trained to remain sealed. "I thought providing for you was protection. I thought arranging things was care. When my mother spoke, when Julian interfered, when the house made plans around your body, I corrected outcomes and ignored the fear that had already reached you. I was late every time." "Why?" Elias whispered. Adrian did not pretend not to understand. "Because I knew how to want you near me before I knew how to admit I wanted you safe for yourself. Not for the child. Not for the household. For you." Elias's breathing changed. Adrian looked at the blanket instead of Elias's face. "I kept the ultrasound photo in my wallet because I didn't know where else to put something that made me afraid to hope. When it disappeared, I understood you had taken the proof I was too cowardly to show you." The room blurred. Elias opened his eyes before tears could gather properly. "You should hate me for taking it. I hated that you thought you had to." A strange quiet followed. It was not peace. Peace would have been too easy, too cheaply earned. But the old violence of misunderstanding had lost one of its blades. In the morning, the storm passed. Adrian arranged transport to a larger hospital only after Elias agreed. He did not sit beside him until Elias shifted his hand across the ambulance blanket and left a narrow space. Adrian took it without comment. The coastal road was washed clean. The sea beyond the cliffs still rough and pewter dark. Neither spoke of returning to the Lou residence. At the hospital, Adrian placed a folder on Elias's bedside table. Elias looked at it for a long time before touching it. Another contract. Documents terminating the custody default clause. Equal parental authority. A restriction barring any Lou family representative from negotiating your postpartum arrangements. They were signed before I found you. Adrian paused. They require your review, not your gratitude. Elias opened the folder. The pages were real. Ink, NDA, signatures, seals. The weapons had been dismantled in the language that created them. "You could have shown me this first." Elias said, "Yes." "Instead, you made soup." "Yes." The corner of Elias's mouth moved despite himself. "You're terrible at priorities." "I am improving slowly. Very slowly." Adrian accepted the judgment as fair. Elias read until his eyes tired. Then he pushed the folder back. "I'm not going home with you yet." Adrian nodded. "Then I'll stay nearby." "I didn't invite you." "I'll stay far enough that you don't feel cornered. Near enough that the clinic can call me." "That sounds like negotiation." "It is." Elias studied him. This Adrian was not less powerful, but power had stopped arriving first. It waited at the door, hands visible, asking whether it could enter. "One street away," Elias said. "One street away." Adrian agreed. For the next months, their life rebuilt itself in increments too small to frighten Elias away. Adrian rented a plain apartment near the hospital. He still took calls and made directors tremble through screens. But every Friday he sat in the obstetric waiting area with Elias's scarf folded over one arm, pretending not to memorize every other couple's ease. Elias did not forgive him on any single day. Forgiveness arrived like weather changing over a long season. It came when Adrian asked before entering his room, when he stopped saying "you need" and learned to ask, "Do you want?" When Helena called and Adrian let Elias hear him say, "You will not speak to him as if he is temporary." By winter, Elias's body had grown heavy with the child. His temper shortened, his silences deepened, his fear returned in dreams. Adrian learned to sit through all of it without turning emotion into instruction. Some nights Elias woke from nightmares of empty nurseries and legal clauses. And Adrian remained in the chair beside him until Elias's breathing steadied. Once, near dawn, Elias opened his eyes and said, "You can lie down. The chair is cruel." Adrian looked at him for permission, hidden beneath the words. Elias turned his face away. But he did not withdraw the blanket. That was how Adrian first slept beside him, not as a claiming, not as a triumph, but carefully on the far edge of the bed. One hand resting where Elias could reach it if he chose. The birth came during the first snowfall. It began quietly, with Elias pausing in the middle of breakfast and looking down as if his body had spoken in a language he needed a moment to translate. Adrian put down the knife he had been using to cut pears. For once, he did not ask unnecessary questions. He gathered the hospital bag, called the doctor, and helped Elias into the car with hands that shook only after the door closed. Labor was long. Pain stripped Elias of politeness. Then dignity. Then shame. Adrian stayed beside him through every hour, taking blame for things no one could control because Elias needed somewhere to put the agony. When Elias said, half delirious, "Don't let them take the baby," Adrian bent close and answered, "No one will. I'm here. You are the first person our child belongs to." Near midnight, their son was born. The room filled with a thin, furious cry. Elias lay exhausted beneath damp hair and white light, too empty to move, too overwhelmed to weep. The nurse placed the child against him, small and red and alive. And Elias looked down with an expression Adrian would remember until the end of his life, wonder sharpened by terror, love arriving like a wound that chose to heal. Adrian stood frozen beside the bed. "Hold him," Elias whispered. Adrian looked at him. "Are you sure?" "No." Elias's mouth trembled. "But do it anyway." The nurse guided the child into Adrian's arms. He held the newborn as if the world had become breakable in one place and entrusted itself to him. His face changed slowly, not melting, not collapsing. but opening around a fear so reverent it became tenderness. The living glacier. People had called him. Elias watched him now and thought the ice had not shattered. It had learned, painfully and late, how to carry spring water beneath it. Adrian looked at the child, then at Elias. "Thank you," he said. It was not enough for everything. It did not need to be. Elias closed his eyes, one hand still resting near their son's blanket. Outside the hospital window, snow continued falling over the city, covering old footprints and the long path that had brought them here without erasing it. By spring, the employees of Liu Holdings had learned to fear a new kind of silence. It was not the silence that came before Adrian Liu dismantled a failed proposal, nor the silence that made directors straighten their backs as if discipline could be absorbed through posture. This one arrived every Wednesday at 4:25. When the CEO's phone vibrated once and he closed whatever document lay before him, no discussion survived that sound. No emergency. No delayed vote. No overseas call carried enough authority to keep him in the room. The first time it happened, an executive had said, unwisely, "Mr. Liu, the client is still waiting." Adrian had lifted his eyes. "So is my son." After that, no one asked again. The child's name was Noah Wen Liu. Though Adrian had insisted Elias's surname come first on the birth certificate, the nurse had looked between them at the hospital counter, uncertain whether she had misheard. Elias had been pale, exhausted, and still too weak to stand without support. Adrian had held the pen out to him and said, "You choose the order." It had not healed everything. Elias understood by then that no single gesture could undo the architecture of fear, but he remembered the way Adrian had stood beside him in that bright administrative room, publicly offering up the power his family had once assumed would never be questioned. Some apologies were spoken, others arrived as empty spaces where control used to be. They did not return to the Liu residence immediately. Elias recovered in the apartment near the hospital, a place with plain walls, uneven heating, and windows that faced the small park across the street. Adrian could have hated it for its narrow rooms and unreliable elevator. Instead, he learned where the floorboards creaked, which burner heated too fast, and how to move through the kitchen at midnight without waking either Elias or the baby. Noah was not an easy child. He cried with astonishing conviction, as if offended by the inadequacy of the world. His alpha pheromones, still faint and undeveloped, stirred whenever he was hungry or cold. Adrian handled bored hostility with less caution than he used when warming a bottle. The first time he tested milk against his wrist, his expression had been so grave that Elias, feverish and sore on the sofa, had turned his face into the cushion to hide a laugh. "You can laugh," Adrian said without looking up. "I'm not laughing. You're shaking. That is postpartum weakness." That was a terrible lie. The room had gone quiet after that, but not painfully. Elias had laughed again, softly this time, and the sound entered Adrian's chest with such force that he had to look down at the bottle until his face settled. There were still many things he did not know how to say. He was learning that not every truth required speech the moment it was felt. Some could be placed in warmed milk, folded blankets, a hand waiting open beside the bed. Elias's forgiveness did not arrive as absolution. It came in permissions. At first, Adrian could hold Noah only when Elias placed the child in his arms. Later, Adrian could lift him from the crib when he cried. Later still, Elias woke one dawn to find the other side of the bed empty and followed a thin thread of humming into the nursery. Adrian stood by the window, Noah tucked against his shoulder. Singing under his breath with no melody, Elias recognized. His voice was low and uncertain, Outside, early light softened the buildings into pale gold. The baby had stopped crying. One tiny fist gripped Adrian's collar as if the most feared alpha in the city existed solely as a warm surface to sleep against. Elias stood in the doorway and did not announce himself. For years, he had believed love would arrive loudly if it ever came for him. It would insist, claim, overturn rooms, prove itself so dramatically that no doubt could remain. Yet the thing forming between them now was quieter and more difficult to dismiss. It lived in restraint. It stood awake at dawn. It chose not to step closer unless invited. It remembered the flavor of fear and did not ask fear to vanish quickly. "You'll be late," Elias said at last. Adrian turned. He did not look embarrassed. That, too, was new. "The meeting can start without me. It's with the Eastern suppliers. They have waited for my signature before. Your directors will think I've ruined you." Adrian looked at Noah, then at Elias. "They're improving." "What are my priorities?" Elias leaned against the doorframe, arms folded loosely. His body was still thinner than before pregnancy, his face softer from sleeplessness, his eyes clearer in a way that came not from innocence, but from surviving the end of several illusions. That almost sounded like humor. "I'm practicing." "Poorly." Noah stirred between them, offended by the exchange. Adrian adjusted the blanket with careful fingers. Elias watched the movement and felt the old ache. But it had changed shape. Once, tenderness from Adrian had frightened him because it seemed temporary. A skill learned for pregnancy, and now the child was born. The crisis passed. The house no longer forcing them into proximity, and Adrian was still there. Sleepless, awkward, devastatingly present. Helena visited once in late spring. She arrived not at the apartment, but in the lobby below, because Adrian had made it clear she would not cross Elias's threshold without invitation. Elias went down alone, wearing a grey coat and carrying Noah against his chest. Helena stood beside the reception desk, pearls at her throat, dignity untouched by age or defeat. For a long moment, she looked at the child. Something in her face shifted. Regret, perhaps, or the recognition of a future she could no longer arrange. "He has Adrian's eyes," she said. "He has his own eyes," Elias replied. Helena accepted the correction with a small incline of her head. "I came to apologize." Elias did not soften. To me, or to the situation? The question struck cleanly. Helena looked at him then, not as a temporary omega or a difficult variable, but as someone whose judgment she could not bypass. "To you," she said, "though I cannot pretend apology makes what I did smaller." "No," Elias said, "it doesn't." Behind her composure, Helena's fingers tightened around her handbag. "May I see him?" Elias looked down at Noah's sleeping face. The answer inside him was not hatred. Hatred would have been simpler. What remained was boundary, firm and clear as glass. "Not today." Helena closed her eyes once. "I understand." Perhaps she did. Perhaps she did not. Understanding was no longer Elias's burden to extract from her. He returned upstairs to find Adrian waiting by the apartment door, not interfering, not asking for details with his eyes, though every line of him wanted to know. Elias handed him Noah. "Your mother is still downstairs." Adrian's expression darkened. "Did she upset you?" "No." Elias slipped off his coat. "I upset her." Adrian looked at him for a moment, then lowered his head, almost smiling into Noah's blanket. Elias saw it and felt warmth spread through him, quiet and reluctant, and no longer unwelcome. Julian left the city before summer. He sent no apology, only a letter addressed to Elias in careful handwriting. Elias read it once while Noah slept in the bassinet beside him. Julian did not excuse himself. He wrote that envy had made him honest in the cruelest way, and that he hoped Elias would never mistake being chosen late for being chosen less. The sentence lingered. Elias burned the letter over the sink, not in anger, in release. When he returned to work, it was on his own terms. He took a consulting position with limited hours and refused Adrian's offer of a private office beside his own. The entire executive floor held its breath the first day. Elias walked in, carrying a slim folder, dressed in a cream coat, his expression calm enough to make gossip die before it formed. Adrian met him near the elevators. "Your office is ready on the 31st floor. I requested the 27th. The 31st has better light. The 27th has fewer people afraid to breathe around you." Adrian considered this. That is a fair point. 3 passing managers looked as if they had witnessed a natural law collapse. Elias entered the elevator without waiting for him. After a beat, Adrian followed, carrying Noah's diaper bag because they were going to the pediatrician after lunch. The bag was pale blue, embroidered with small clouds. It looked absurd against his dark suit. Elias glanced at it. Powerful image. Adrian looked down. It's practical. It has clouds. Noah likes the clouds. Of course. The elevator doors closed. Their reflections stood side by side in the brushed metal, no longer strangers forced into a legal arrangement. Not yet people untouched by old wounds. But something more durable than either. They had not become gentle because life had softened. They had become gentle because both knew exactly how sharp silence could be. Winter returned before they moved back to the Liu residence. Not to the old wing. Adrian had ordered the east sitting room converted into a library and the archive cabinet removed from his study. The nursery was repainted in warmer colors. Elias chose the curtains. Adrian did not pretend not to care. But he did ask 3 times whether the fabric trapped dust until Elias threatened to make him sleep in the laundry room. On the first snowy evening, Elias woke from a nap to find the bed empty and the house unusually quiet. He followed a faint smell down the hall chicken broth. Ginger. Rice steamed properly this time. In the nursery, the door was half open. Adrian lay asleep on the rug beside Noah's crib. One arm bent beneath his head, the other resting near the wooden bars as if even sleep refused to leave the child unguarded. Noah slept peacefully, one cheek pressed against the blanket. Tiny mouth parted. Elias stood there for a long while. The lamp cast honey-colored light over the room. Snow tapped softly at the window. On the small table near the chair sat a bowl of soup covered to keep warm. A spoon placed beside it, and a note in Adrian's precise handwriting. Edible this time. Elias covered his mouth with one hand. The laugh that escaped him was almost silent, almost a sob. He took the spare blanket from the chair and knelt beside Adrian. The man who had once ruled conference rooms with cold eyes stirred at the touch but did not wake. Up close, there were new lines of exhaustion at his brow, traces of sleepless nights and choices made again and again until they became a life. Elias spread the blanket over him. Adrian's hand moved in sleep, searching without demand. Elias looked at it, then placed his own fingers lightly over Adrian's. The old fear did not vanish. Perhaps it never would completely. But it no longer stood between them like a locked door. It sat somewhere behind them, acknowledged, no longer permitted to govern the house. Adrian opened his eyes. For a moment, neither spoke. Snow fell beyond the window. Noah breathed softly in the crib. The soup waited on the table, warm and ordinary, and proof of 1,000 imperfect attempts. "You stayed," Adrian said, voice rough with sleep. Elias looked at him. Once. Those words would have sounded like disbelief or possession. Now they sounded like gratitude. "I chose to." Elias answered. Adrian's fingers tightened beneath his. Careful even now. Elias leaned down and rested his forehead against Adrian's shoulder. No vow followed. No dramatic promise was needed. The room already held them, the child. The winter, the soup that did not burn. The silence no longer used as a weapon. For the first time, the house did not feel built before they arrived. It felt like somewhere they had made by staying.